Well, today, as Jeff mentioned a little bit earlier, we're starting our stewardship focus here at the church. How many of you are excited about this? If you're excited, laugh. I knew it. You look forward to this time every year. And you look forward to the failings, and you look forward... Yeah, oftentimes we don't necessarily, this isn't marked on our calendars as being necessarily a high holiday. Sometimes we dread the stewardship focus, and I got to make a confession to you. I dislike, and this is bad, but I dislike when radio stations that are based on pledges have their pledge drives. When I'm driving in the car and I want to hear maybe my favorite program or something, and I turn it on and they're talking about all these different levels of giving and how if I give in the next 10 minutes, something amazing is going to happen. And then the next day I forget. And then the next day I go again, or maybe 2 days later, or maybe it's even the beginning of the next week, and I'm like, wow, they're still doing that. They're still doing the pledge drive. And I just think to myself, there has to be a better way. You know, it's almost like they're begging for money, and yet it works. They know that they have many listeners who listen at different times, and so they need to communicate it in different ways and at different times. And it seems to work because often they reach their goals. But I just don't like it. And so maybe you're like that. You know, you kind of dread the stewardship time. Stewardship refers to everything that we have that God has given us and how we manage it or how we use it for purposes that will outlast us. But oftentimes stewardship is code word for money, and stewardship definitely has to do with money. And when we talk about money, a lot of the times, one of the reasons why you might dread this time of the year is because you have been made to feel like maybe the church is intentionally or unintentionally given the message that you are here, we have you here for your money. And if that message has ever been conveyed to you, then I apologize on behalf of the church. It might not have been intentional, but either way, what it does is it actually pushes you away from the church and makes you less motivated to give. If that's the message that's getting across, is that we have you here for your money, and that's all that matters. Now, as we talk about giving to the church, why do we give to the church? There are two general ways, or two general reasons why we give to the church. One is for institutional survival. So sometimes we talk about it like that, like you need to give to the church so that we can make our budget. You need to give to the church so we can keep our doors open, you know, so that we can keep alive, basically. And then there's another way of talking about why we give. Another reason that we talk about is so we can make disciples. And that might sound like splitting hairs, but it really isn't, because one is more inwardly focused, the other is more outwardly focused. And we need both, because practically speaking, that's what you're doing when you give to the church. You're paying the light bill, you're paying the church staff, you're doing all these different things that are in the budget, but yet the budget also tells a different story. Now this week you're going to get a mailing, and if you haven't already, you'll get it this week. It has a letter that introduces this, and it has some financial information as well. It has a summarized budget and how we're doing so far this year. And unless you really like numbers, it's probably not going to be incredibly motivating to you unless you know the story behind the numbers. Numbers usually tell a story. And the story behind the numbers is how we go about our work of making disciples. But I know that gone are the days for many people when they will just give to the church automatically because of obligation or because that's just what you do, or to prop up a budget. You know, those things don't necessarily motivate us that well. I know that you want to give to places that make a difference. You want to give to places that make a very real, tangible, positive difference in the world. If you give to a church, you want to give to a church that's making disciples. And I think that's good. And as churches, we have to realize that we are not the only Christian nonprofit organization in the world. There are many, especially this time of the year, you'll start getting in the mail letters and pamphlets from all kinds of good Christian nonprofit organizations who do a lot of good in the world that are going to ask you for your money. We can do so much. And here's the thing. The money that you have is not inherently good. It's not inherently evil. It just is. It's money. And it's a tool. Money is a tool that can be used for great good. It is also a tool that can be wasted. And so I know that you want to make sure that where you invest and where you give is going to a good cause. You want to know that where you are giving, whether it be your church or somewhere else, is making a very real difference in our world and making disciples, as we put it. And so I hope that, in the next few weeks I'll be able to share with you, my goal is to share with you ways in which I believe that this church is one of the greatest investments that you can make. And why I believe that we are making disciples, that we are making a positive difference. And so I hope to be sharing with you some stories in the next few weeks, as well as teaching a little bit about how it is that our faith is related to our finances. That's hard to think about. What does that mean exactly? Because usually when I think about money, and when we think about money, we don't always think about faith. Oftentimes we think in one mode or another. I'm balancing the checkbook, I'm updating my budget, whatever it is. But they're related. Jesus talked about money a lot. He talked about money more than heaven and hell combined. It's been said that 11 out of the 39 parables of Jesus were related to money. And in the Gospel of Luke, every 1 out of 7 verses has to do in some shape or form with money. No, I did not go through the Gospel of Luke and make a chart and count up all those verses. I read it somewhere. Maybe sometime when I'm out of things to do, I'll actually try to figure that out myself. But you know what that means? 1 out of every 7 verses. That's a lot. Why? Why is Jesus talking about money? Well, because he cares about our hearts. That's why. He cares about our hearts, and he realizes that money is so much more than just about money. It's not just a financial issue. It's also a spiritual issue, an emotional issue. Money takes so much of our energy and our time to figure out how to manage it, what to do with it, how to deal with our different payments and things like that. Money is a cause of a lot of stress. Money can be a cause of divorce. Money is a cause of division. Money is just an emotionally charged issue for many reasons, some not having anything to do with faith, but it's all interrelated, you see. It's all interrelated, and Jesus understood that he understood this very well. So looking at the scripture readings, we have 2 scripture readings today, and one is a disturbing story in the Gospel of Luke. It's about this farmer, they call him the rich farmer, sometimes referred to it. It's disturbing for a number of reasons, but number one, because this time of the year we're harvesting, right? So it really kind of hits us, and it's like, well, gee, is Jesus trying to insult farmers? Is he just trying to pick on the farmers? I don't think that's the case. First of all, we have to remember that back then it was a very agricultural society, even more so than it is now. And number 2, we have to realize that farming was different back then as well. It wasn't quite the same as it is today, where we are harvesting crops that will impact people throughout the world in some cases. And so I think that the basis of the story that he's telling is, you could say, okay, here's a guy who's really successful in life, and he's keeping all the profits for himself. That's what he's trying to say. So, perhaps today, if Jesus was here today, he would use a different story. He would say there was a businessman who made millions of dollars, and he just put it in a huge bank account, sat back and said, I've been successful. I can just be merry and be happy. And in our world, such a person would be considered a success. And so this story is also disturbing because whereas here's a person, in this case in the Bible is a farmer, who was a success, Jesus calls him a fool. I thought Jesus was supposed to be friendly. He calls him a fool. And the reason why, what he's trying to say, because remember, Jesus made this up. Parables are stories that Jesus made up to make a point. And the point was that it's important for us to lay up treasures in heaven rather than treasures on earth. And so that brings up a whole host of questions, doesn't it? What does he mean? What exactly is a treasure in heaven versus a treasure on earth? What is too much? How much is too much? In an age where we know we need to save for retirement and we need to save for future purchases that we know we're going to have to do, how much is too much? How much stuff is too much stuff? These are hard questions to answer. And I don't have hard and fast answers, but I read recently that we have 2.3 billion square feet of rentable storage units in the United States. 2.3 billion square foot of rentable storage units in the United States. We have so much stuff, we don't have room to put it in our houses. And so this is partially, our very foundation of our economy is built on the prospect that we're going to keep buying stuff. We're going to keep buying more and more things. And so some things we need to buy, some things we need to be convinced to buy. And so the commercials and things will convince us of why we need something that we may or may not actually need. And it can get out of hand. It can get out of hand and it can get ahead of us. But how much is too much? I don't know. That's really hard to say. But I will say that we have to be careful about where our treasure is. There's nothing wrong with stuff. I like stuff. You like stuff? We all like stuff. I like the word stuff. But there's nothing wrong with it. But where is our treasure? As we think about this, in Matthew, Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Sometimes we think it's the other way around. Where your heart is, there your treasure will be. But that's not often the times the case. What do I mean by that? Well, oftentimes we might say that we want to invest in that particular thing in our lives, but then in practicality, we're not investing in it. So for instance, let's say that I were to tell you that I believe that giving to God is really important. And let's say I was to tell you that I really believe giving to my local church is really important, but I don't have any income to give to the local church because all of my extra income is tied up in debt payments to keep up with the lifestyle that I think I need. If that's the case, then where I might think that giving to God and giving to something that will last is important, in reality, in practicality, as I look at my checkbook, I see that my priorities are elsewhere, that my lifestyle is more what I need. My lifestyle is more where my treasure is. And I'm not trying to make you feel guilty or to judge anyone. Like I said, this is a very personal issue. But I do want to challenge you to take a look in your own life. What is it that you would like to invest in? What is it that you would say is most important in your life? If you had extra income, maybe you don't, maybe you do. But if you had extra income, let's pretend, what would you do with it? How would you invest it in something that would last? If you had extra time, you may or may not have extra time, but if you had extra time, how would you use it? As we look at the three things that Jeff mentioned, time, talents, and treasure, as we look at those things, how do we invest these things? As I said, it's not just money, but it's everything God has given us. And how do we invest those things in things that will last? So take a look at what would I invest in if I could? Maybe you already are, but if you're not, what could I invest in if I could? And then take a look, what am I really investing in currently? And a good way to do that is to take a look at your checkbook and your calendar. How am I investing my time, my talents, my money, my energy, everything that I've got, everything God has given me, how am I investing in it? And then ask yourself, is there a disconnect? Because there can be. There can be a disconnect between our heart and our treasure, between what we want and to invest in and what we are currently investing in. And if that's the case, is there a step, however small, is there a step that you can take in the direction of aligning your treasure in your heart? It might be a small step. For some of us, you might not be in a place where you can take a giant leap. You know? You might not be able to do that. That might be too hard. You might not be in a place in your life where you can do that. But maybe you can take a tiny step and say, well, maybe if I can free up a half hour in a week, I can use this half hour to spend time helping with whatever it is that you want to help with. Or maybe if I can somehow save a certain amount of money this month, maybe I can give it to invest in something that I believe is important. But how is it, however small, that you can move in that direction to make your treasure and your heart in alignment? Giving is important, not just for the person you're giving it to or the organization you're giving to. It's important for you. Giving is a spiritual discipline, just as important as Bible study, prayer, and worship. No more, no less. Because it helps us to grow in our own faith and helps us to become more Christ-like. And so, I want to encourage you. You know, we all know what's important in life. When we get to the end of our lives, few people talk about how much stuff they have. Usually, they talk about things that'll last. They talk about family, friends, God, things that will last. How many of you have heard of Billy Graham? You might be surprised that there are people who might not have heard of Billy Graham. He's in his 90s now. He's not able to get out and speak and talk, and it's actually been a while now since he has. And so, actually, there could be quite a few of you younger folks who don't know who Billy Graham is. But Billy Graham is an evangelist. So he went out and he would go on crusades, which were these times when he would share the gospel. He would share the story of Jesus with people. And he would go throughout the world, really, and he would do these long crusades. Sometimes they would last months on end. And every single day he would preach, sometimes multiple times a day, every day, for months on end. And there's no end date to it. It just goes on and on until, you know, he felt that it was kind of waning and the energy was going down. But as long as people were coming, he would keep preaching. Many people's lives were changed because of the ministry of Billy Graham. And yet, you know, I read his biography a number of years ago, and in it, he talked about how, you know, he's basically gone for his family as they grew up. And he recounts a story of a time when his wife came visiting him with one of their children, and he didn't recognize his child because his child had changed so much. He didn't know who it was. In his later years, somebody asked him, is there anything you would do differently, looking back? And he said, sure. I would preach less, study more, and spend more time with family. And he said that he would counsel, you know, he's had people who are aspiring to be evangelists, and he would tell them, don't feel that you have to do everything. You know, he wished that he had taken less speaking engagements. Isn't that interesting? Because he did so much good. And yet it's a reminder to us that even spiritual leaders struggle with priorities and what's important and keeping things in balance, whether it be time, talents, or money. And what he learned is that, and what we can learn from that is there are a lot of good things to do, and there are a lot of good things, but yet we got to keep that balance, and we got to keep those priorities in mind. What do I want to invest myself in? And so I really want to encourage you during this time. I hope that you don't just grin and bear this time, this stewardship focus, until I stop talking about this and move on to Christmas, right? But I hope that you'll really take this time as an opportunity to explore an area of your faith that oftentimes we neglect to explore. And that is as it applies to our stewardship, how we use all that God has given us. And how you can use that. And I hope that you'll use this as an ability, as a possibility maybe to challenge yourself to take a step, however small it may be. A step in the direction of healthy Christian stewardship. That you might continue to be challenged in all areas of life, not just stewardship, but all areas of life, to continue to grow into the image of Christ. Amen.